So with that, I want to give the clicker to Morten and get some brains up on stage and go a little bit deeper.
Thanks so much. Great. So, Anders, I just think I just found out your next topic on the Tech Town Hall, and I think you're really good at roasting. So maybe we can have like a roasting session for maybe all the Hall of Famers. That would be a great part, actually. Yeah. Is this the wrong one, or?
I decided because we're a little bit late.
Okay.
Those topics at the end.
Okay, brilliant.
Let's go back to that. Funding.
So, talking about roasting, Anders. Yeah, so shortly, talking about my complexity, I'm probably even paler and more blonde today. I just had my first kid this July, so hopefully it's my DNA which kind of comes from with the complexity compared to Tom Evan. He has a great town, and I'm quite envious of it. What I'll do for you today is I'll paint you a little picture, which is actually quite similar to the Norwegian weather this summer. Quite dark and gloomy, but hopefully a little bit sunshine in the end. Usually we're quite lucky to get the sun at the end of the day, so hopefully that will be the same picture we're painting today. So in short, just to kind of bring the long view on and go straight up in helicopter view. I think it's important to remember that up until last year, we actually laid back a 7-year bull run within the VC market, right? The world hadn't seen such a steep increase as it had the last 7 years. And it was a record new of VCs established, there was a record new unicorns established, and it was all driven by usually the tech and SaaS business, but you also got kind of climate and environment on top of that at the end, right? And then it came the period which we now all demise. It was the second half of 2022. Russia invaded Ukraine, you got the inflation, which we know all talk about, and you also got the interest rates, which kind of kicked up this correction, right? So we came from very high levels with a large correction in the second half of 22, and then we're now in 23. What's 23, right? At least we like to think about it as a new normal. You will see in my figures that compared to 2019, 2020, we're still increasing. Maybe from 21 and 22, we're a little bit down. That being said, cycles happen, right? It's part of the environment we're in, so it doesn't need to be that negative. I think the time now is really it's a flight to quality. There's still money around. You mentioned the article in DN with Trond Kristian. There was 100 million nakis per week, which goes into startups, which is a great figure, right? If you think about it. Things take a longer time, so I think everybody's seeing that momentum which you had in 21 isn't there anymore. You could raise money on Monday and then close it on Wednesday. Fredrik and Dune probably isn't there, but that's a great example on that, right? And still, the opportunities are there, built for the long term, right? The money is there, things takes time, and start building. So this is the global picture, right? So what's the Norwegian picture? This is the Norwegian picture overall on the long helicopter view. I think Norway has come from a level which has been, way too little funding going into the VC environment. If you view it in terms of the ecosystem, you talked about that, right? That since 2015, it's just been massive. Anders, you talked about it as well. Kind of when you established MES, there wasn't anything. Nobody talked about startups, right? So that environment and that ecosystem has kind of grown. It's kind of almost grown exponentially, right, up until 22. And actually,
and I guess we can also mention that everybody else started in 2008 with the financial crisis, and we started in 2015-16 with the oil crisis. So we're late to the party, and then
exactly, good point. So that's kind of the picture I want to paint for you to Norway. That we're coming from a very low bottom, and we're kind of catching up. That's the story. So when the world fell in 22, Norway actually grew, which is quite amazing. However, what we've seen, and that's kind of coming to the topic of this talk, what's the status so far in 23? It's actually quite gloomy. So far this year, it's been raised $462 million within VC funding, and it's been quite a dramatic fall. If you look at it by quarter, it's been mainly underperforming both in terms of 21 and 22. What you see here are funding per quarters, and then the colors are the various years. So dark blue, 20, red, 23, light blue 22 and orange 21. And what you'll see is that Q1 and Q2 is actually underperforming in terms of 22 and 21, but we're actually outperforming 2020, which is important to bear in mind, right? We've put back us this huge amount of growth, and now we're maybe back to steady state. Still growing a lot, right? So without kind of leaning too much into these figures, it looks like we're on the track of actually exceeding 2020. Maybe we'll see 10 million in VC funding, maybe, but it's at least better than 2020. So it's an important figure to take in place.
And it's important to note that you could have almost dropped the last red column, right?
Exactly.
It's July only, and we're all gone in July.
Exactly.
So if you take Q2, we're not that far behind to 2021 even.
Exactly.
Which was kind of the first crazy year.
And we're actually tracking above, right? 2020, which is a positive thing. That being said, you know, Norway has a lot of catching up to do. We were there almost in 2022. So on this kind of graph, you usually don't want to be on a graph where you have a thick middle waist. However, on this graph, you actually do want to have a thick middle waist. So what you see here is VC funding per capita, meaning, you know, how many dollars go into each country per head. And what you see is that Norway from 2018 has been quite immature compared to our neighbors, which we like to compare ourselves with. Sweden has had more than double the VC funding, almost the same as Denmark, while Finland was a little bit ahead. You see also the trends here, right? With the middle waist just expanding massively in 21, and then in 22, Norway's almost catching up to Sweden, going beyond and above Denmark, and almost catching up to Finland. However, back in 2023, we're deteriorating a little bit more. And the reason behind this is mainly due to the larger rounds. The Series A, B, C rounds are taking much longer time. So in 2020, we had, you mentioned Schibsted, we had a total of 7 rounds above $15 million. In Norway, we hadn't had one. The closest we're having is Waystron, which raised 450 million NOK, but it's still way beyond what we actually saw in 22. So I think seed rounds are there. Probably difficult to say for the guys not getting funding, but the money is there, 100 million NOK a week. However, kind of the larger rounds take much longer time. Mm.
We were in 2018. We were kind of we were 2x behind.
we were skinny. Exactly.
And then we started catching up, and what was catching up was mainly the early rounds. And then when the big money in the late stage rounds came in, that changed the mature markets a little bit more. So
Exactly.
Sweden especially, but also a little bit more Denmark and Finland were more mature and could absorb more later stage rounds. That's why we didn't kind of fatten at that period. And then now that it's going back again, we have to build a little bit up again from a less mature market.
We're post-summer and back in the diet, right? That's basically where it is. But I think it's important to think that the foundation is there, and it's all to work through the cycle. And to give you a little bit flavor, I mentioned the timing, right? I just want to paint a global picture. Things take much more time, specifically on the later rounds. So what you see here is a curve I borrowed from Carta, which has a couple of really great data points. And what you see is actually the number of days between various rounds. So see specifically on the various timing from Series A to B rounds and from B to C rounds. On the A rounds, you've gone from like almost 700 days to 854. And on C rounds, it's even worse, right? It's from 750 to 967. So I think it's important to think that, okay, we're through a throw now. We're at potentially at a very shortfall, but the larger rounds takes longer time. And I think we just need to be patient and work through it. I think that's the most important thing we're doing right now.
Yeah, and as with my co-founder, who loves a little bit complex graphs, this is a little bit complex.
Yeah.
So here you have the time it takes from seed stage to Series A funding. So you have 2019 here, and then you have 2023. So to simplify it, it takes 150 to 200, 300 more days to close the rounds, and it takes longer time the later you get.
Correct, Anders. Thank you for that clarification. Further, we also see there's 2 things being impacted by the down round, right? It's time and it's pricing, basically evaluations. So we talked about Norway being a quite immature market, and we see that clearly on pricing. Specifically, This graph shows you the dilution per round, which is basically what percentage do you have to give away to raise money of your cap table. And I think I just want to entail you kind of comparison of Norway funding versus US funding. If you look at Series A round and B round, Norwegian companies actually had to give away 22.7% and 23% on the A and B round, versus in peak market, US had to give away 16 and 12%, which is almost half, right? And that gap has started to close, but it's still there, which also entails that the market is still immature, but it's getting there. And I think we're going to talk about it, but we see, specifically in Sandwater, we see a lot of international investors now coming to Norway to get good deals, basically. They see that pricing is lower, and they know that there's a lot of quality here. So a couple of them are, for example, Gen C Zero, which invested recently in Kahoot. We see a lot of American companies. National Grid is amongst the water, looking for energy companies. So I think this is just going to bring back that momentum of, where are the good deals? They're in Norway, and we need to paint that picture. Now over to a little bit of sunshine at the end here. I think it's always nice. I got my kid the 15th of July. I've been in the hospital and back home, so I didn't really care about the sunshine, and hence the complexity. But even though I also need some sunshine at the end of the day. So this is an important fact. This quarter was actually the first time since the down round that funding actually started to increase. So what you see here on the white graph, which is the crucial one, is the amount of funding going into startups in the US. And what you see is that since Q4 21, it's actually started to increase from a bottom. And the other thing you see as well is that down rounds have started to decrease. So coming from the peak market there in Q4 and Q1, there were 5% of rounds which were down round. That actually was about to 20% by Q1 in 23, but that has also started to increase. So is there a light in the tunnel? Maybe, we don't know, but it's sure nice to at least get a little bit of a tan at the end.
Great. So okay, let's do a clap first. So before we get the VCs up, what is your analysis on the lag between the American venture market and startup scene and the Norwegian and Nordic startup scene?
No, it's great.
What do you expect? What is your looking into the spåkula? What do you think?
Yeah, no, expecting is always a nice thing, right? I think it's a very good point because now here comes the brains, right? But Goldman Sachs has done thorough analysis on this, and they are viewing the lag between public markets and the VC funding market within US, and also the VC funding in market in the US and the VC funding in Europe. And then maybe you have a lag from Europe to Norway, who knows? But what they specifically see is that you have a clear lag of 12 to 14 months between the drop or the increase in the public markets till that affects the VC funding market. And you also have a 12 months lag behind that as well. So potentially these effects, 12 months ahead of now, maybe we're starting to see an increase as well. But I think it's still a little bit of dark weather ahead of us, but the sunshine is hopefully definitely there.
Great. Thank you.